welcome to the debate. So imagine waking up tomorrow to find out that issuing a standard customer invoices is, well, suddenly illegal unless a government algorithm actually approves it first.
A total nightmare scenario for most companies, honestly.
Right. I mean, you can't ship the goods, you can't book the revenue, and your entire supply chain just grinds to a halt. And the crazy thing is, in dozens of countries around the world right now, that is no longer hypothetical. It is the law.
Yeah, it is. We are seeing this massive shift toward continuous transaction controls, or CTCs.
Exactly. CTCs, where tax authorities are essentially inserting themselves as a mandatory node in your real-time financial network. And today, we are looking at why the technology infrastructure of most global enterprises is just spectacularly unprepared to handle this.
It is a complete paradigm shift, really. I mean, we are talking about moving from post-facto, periodic reporting, like, sending a summary spreadsheet at the end of the month, to real-time transaction-level visibility.
Precisely. And this massive shift brings us to a profound architectural misalignment that is currently plaguing the global compliance technology market. The core challenge for enterprises has fundamentally changed. It is no longer about merely transmitting a document from point A to point B.
Right. It's much deeper than that now.
It is about building continuous financial intelligence infrastructures. But if you look at the data, the analysis on this, the market is offering solutions that solve the old problem, not the new one. So I will be arguing today that the dominant compliance architectures being sold right now are functionally obsolete, trapping data in fragmented systems and actively constraining a company's ability to generate global financial intelligence.
And I will be taking the opposing view. I contend that these so-called obsolete architectures, or failure modes as some call them, actually represent pragmatic, highly rational architectural trade-offs. Trade-offs that are tailored to specific enterprise realities rather than, systemic market failures.
Well, let's really dig into the mechanics of this then. Because from my perspective, the regulatory environment has irrevocably changed, with the rise of mandates like real-time invoice clearance and standard audit file for tax.
The SAF-T mandates, yeah.
Right, SAF-T, which basically requires you to hand over your entire digital accounting ledger in a specific standardized format. Compliance has to be an embedded intelligence-generating capability now. However, vendors are still pushing these obsolete models, optimized for simple document transmission.
But there's a reason for that, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Well, we are seeing things like the acquisition patchwork and the ERP dependency model, which frankly create compounding technical debt. They disguise incomplete platforms as complete solutions, and worst of all, they lock valuable transaction intelligence in isolated silos.
I come at it from a different way. While a unified, perfectly clean, canonical data model, basically a universal translator for all your financial data, is a truly elegant theoretical ideal, the models you are critiquing serve legitimate operational functions.
Legitimate functions? By trapping the data?
Yes, absolutely. Take the transmission-only model, sometimes called the unintelligent messenger. That is precisely what many organizations need when their primary goal is reliable, high-volume EDI exchange.
Just basic document routing?
Exactly. And by EDI, I just mean the old-school machine-to-machine transmission of standard documents. They just want that reliable pipe without the massive bloat and the massive expense of an external AI-driven tax engine, judging every single tool by its ability to generate group-level financial intelligence, ignores the immediate, practical, and highly complex compliance mandates that IT departments are actually struggling to meet right now.
Okay, to really understand why this matters, let's start right where the data originates, deep within the enterprise's financial systems. This brings us to the first major architectural battleground.
The ERP dependency architecture.
Yes, the ERP dependency architecture, or the locked add-on. This is the practice of embedding compliance logic, custom tables, and local calculation programs directly into the core of your enterprise resource planning software, like SAP or Oracle. When I look at the mechanics of this, I see a model that structurally fails on scalability and heterogeneity.
How so? Because historically, housing your logic right there in the system of record has been the absolute gold standard for data integrity.
In a vacuum, maybe.
No, in practice, you don't have data leaving the firewall, you don't have syncing errors, it's safe, it's contained.
Historically, yes, when business was simpler. But let's look at how this actually mechanically plays out today. If you build compliance directly into the ERP, you are treating it as a localized processing task. You validate a transaction, generate a document, and submit it.
Which is exactly what the local government is asking for.
Sure, but modern multinational groups don't run single, clean systems. They run mixed environments. They acquire a competitor running NetSuite, they have a regional subsidiary running a mid-market platform, while headquarters runs a heavily customized instance of SAP.
Well, mergers and acquisitions are always messy.
They are, but if your compliance logic is hard-coded into the ERP, your global intelligence layer is structurally blocked by those system boundaries. Think of it this way. Building compliance directly into the ERP is like installing a unique custom engine into every individual car of a train.
Okay, an interesting analogy.
Right? Sure, it solves the problem of local movement for that specific car, but it makes overarching global coordination, analytics, and just sheer speed completely impossible.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the immense physical risk of extracting real-time, millisecond-dependent tax logic entirely outside the system of record?
I mean, the cloud handles millisecond latency all the time.
Let's unpack the physical reality of digital latency under these new continuous transaction controls, though. In many jurisdictions, as we mentioned at the top, an invoice does not legally exist until it is validated by the tax authority.
Right, the clearance model.
Exactly. So think about what that means mechanically in the real world. A truck is waiting at a loading dock in Brazil. That truck is loaded with perishable goods. Under CTCs, that truck cannot legally leave the facility until the government server pings back an approval on the invoice.
The digital handshake.
Yes, if you pull the tax calculation and the compliance logic out of the local ERP and put it into an external, cloud-based intelligence layer hosted halfway across the world, you are introducing network latency. You have to extract the data, format the JSON payload, send it over the internet, wait for the cloud engine to process it against the latest tax logic.
It's all automated, though.
But you still wait for it to contact the government, get the token back, and commit it to your database. If that handshake takes 3 extra seconds, or if there's a timeout, that truck does not move. The produce rots. Milliseconds dictate supply chain reality.
I understand the stakes, but
For a massive organization operating on a single global instance of SAP, isn't the external clean core model just introducing unnecessary latency and massive integration risk? The logic lives close to the data for a very good reason.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the latency issue. Yes, latency is a critical factor, but modern cloud architectures, localized server hosting, and edge computing have largely solved the millisecond delay issue.
Solved is a strong word when we're talking about global internet routing.
We stream high-definition video globally with zero buffer. We can certainly route a 50-kilobyte XML file efficiently. The much bigger risk to the enterprise is what happens when you keep the logic locked in the ERP. Strategic starvation.
Wait, strategic starvation? What do you mean by that?
Yes, strategic starvation. If you keep the logic locked in the ERP, adding your 15th country mandate requires almost as much implementation work as adding your first. Because the logic is localized, it's a completely standalone implementation every single time.
Well, you have to configure for the local laws.
But you are writing new custom code, configuring new custom tables, and hiring specific consultants for every single rollout. Pulling the logic out into a unified external platform is the only way to deploy things like AI or run continuous reconciliation on a global scale. You simply cannot train an AI agent on your global tax position or optimize your cross-border cash flow if the data is trapped in 15 different proprietary ERP data models with different naming conventions and field limits.
But you are assuming that global harmonization of tax data is actually possible without diluting the highly specific local regulatory nuance. And I think that's a really dangerous assumption.
Which is exactly why companies go out and try to buy a global solution. So, an IT director realizes that embedding custom code into their ERP is a nightmare. just as we discussed. Naturally, their reflex is to go out to the market and buy a massive global vendor to handle it for them.
The logical next step.
But as the analysis of the market points out, they are usually just trading one trap for another. They walk straight into the acquisition architecture trap, or the M&A patchwork.
I know the material is highly critical of this, noting that vendors just buy local specialists to create impressive geographical coverage maps, but I would argue that this is a deeply rational market response to an irrational, highly fragmented regulatory environment.
Rational for the vendor's stock price, maybe. But it produces the illusion of a platform. An enterprise looks at a vendor's marketing material and sees a map with 50 shaded countries. They think, oh great, one platform for the whole world.
And they get global coverage.
But under the hood, behind the unified brand and the slick single sign-on dashboard, the enterprise is actually connecting to 20 different underlying platforms. Vendors bought these local companies, but they never rebuilt the code. Each underlying system has its own data model, its own error handling protocols, and its own update cycle.
But they work locally. Sure, but this results in what the analysis calls a perpetual services engagement. Because the underlying architectures are fragmented, every single term a country updates its reporting schema, it requires expensive vendor consulting to map your data to their specific local tool. You haven't bought a capability you can operate independently, you've basically bought a permanent dependency on the vendor's consulting timeline.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Tax law is inherently local, deeply political, and highly idiosyncratic. No one is debating that the laws are local, but the solution has to be too. A unified, beautiful, theoretical, canonical data model built by software engineers in Silicon Valley or London is going to struggle immensely with the edge cases of Brazilian tax law, or the highly specific localized reporting quirks of India's GST network. Not if the model is designed correctly to absorb those parameters. When a vendor acquires a local platform in Brazil, they aren't just buying software. They are acquiring decades of hard-won, highly specific local processing logic and relationships with local tax authorities. That local legacy platform is going to handle Brazilian edge cases far better than a newly built global schema ever could. What you are deriding as fragmentation and a patchwork, I call managed incompatibility. It is the necessary price an enterprise pays for genuine local compliance accuracy.
Managed incompatibility. Wow. That sounds like a very clever euphemism for massive technical debt. I have to push back here. When you have 2 or 3, let alone 20, disjointed systems maintained by completely different engineering traditions under one corporate umbrella, they naturally pull in different directions over time.
They handle their own jurisdictions.
But they experience architectural drift, they accumulate technical debt differently. When the enterprise tries to do a holistic upgrade, or when a new global mandate requires cross-jurisdictional reporting, like the EU's VITA initiative, for example, those patched-together seams become highly visible and structurally rigid. The system just breaks under its own weight.
But let's look at the alternative, which brings us to another failure mode the analysis points out, the forced coupling trap.
Ah, right, when they try to mash it all together.
Exactly. When vendors realize they have a patchwork, they often try to force everything into a single, newly written architecture. And it frequently fails spectacularly. Why? Because tax calculation relies on rule engines inside the processing flow. It's highly complex if this then that logic. Document exchange, on the other hand, relies on high-throughput network routing, getting hundreds of thousands of files from point A to point B securely.
They are different disciplines, yes.
They are fundamentally different architectural challenges. Forcing them together retrospectively to create a single clean platform often creates the very processing bottlenecks and latency delays you were so quick to dismiss earlier.
But that's exactly why native architectural integration from the ground up is required, rather than cobbling together legacy systems or forcing incompatible engines together. Which actually brings us to the third boundary we need to explore. The explicit boundary between the vendor and the enterprise.
Right. Who does the actual mapping?
Exactly. We've talked about the mess inside the enterprise's ERP and the mess inside the vendor's M&A portfolio. Now let's talk about the integration point between the two. This is the customer-side complexity transfer, or the pre-formatted trap?
This is a fascinating area of disagreement. The analysis argues that requiring customers to pre-transform their raw data into vendor-specific XML formats is a failure mode. I argue it is a highly effective, highly deliberate governance model.
Wait, let me make sure I am actually understanding this. You're saying that placing the burden of highly complex regulatory data transformation squarely on the shoulders of the customer's IT team is effective governance?
Absolutely. Because of control. Think about how the data flows. If the vendor maintains the regulatory content, meaning they keep track of the submission protocols, they maintain the secure connections to the government portals, and the customer maps their native ERP data to those specific inputs, the enterprise retains strict, absolute control over how its financial data is extracted and interpreted.
But the IT team isn't a team of tax lawyers.
They don't have to be. You are not letting some third-party black box algorithm decide how your highly complex financial transactions map to legal regulatory requirements. Your internal teams own the extraction logic.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning at all, because you are vastly overestimating the specialized domain knowledge of a standard enterprise IT department.
I think you're underestimating them.
If you are an IT director listening to this right now, you know exactly the pain I am talking about. An invoice is generated in SAP with 50 standard fields, but the Italian government requires something called fattura PA, a highly specific, deeply complex XML structure with dozens of required tags, conditional fields, and specific tax exemption codes. Why should an internal IT guy in Chicago have to know the specific XML tags required for an Italian VAT exemption?
But that IT guy knows how his company's SAP instance is structured better than any external vendor ever could.
Yes, they know their source data perfectly, but they have no idea about the destination language. When vendors force customers to pre-transform the data themselves, it's like hiring an expensive translator who demands you learn their language before they'll translate it for you. It defeats the entire purpose of hiring them.
It's just data mapping.
It's so much more than that. The vendor is essentially saying, we built the pipe to the government, but you have to invent the complex water filter to make sure only the right data goes in. This creates deeply fragile infrastructures. Every single time Italy updates its schema, the vendor updates their platform, but now the customer's custom IT transformation code is broken.
Well, they just update their mapping.
The customer has to scramble to rewrite their scripts, test them, and deploy them before they start failing compliance checks. Every ERP update, every regulatory shift, it all requires internal IT intervention. It completely disguises an incomplete compliance platform as a complete solution.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the sheer risk of generalized mapping? A vendor saying just send us your raw data in any format and our canonical model will magically map it to 50 different global tax schemas is making a massive, often unfulfillable technological promise.
It's not magic, it's just software engineering.
In practice, generic mapping tools often misinterpret complex, company-specific transaction flows. The pre-formatted trap might require custom code, yes, but that custom code is highly specific, highly deterministic, and auditable by the company's own internal compliance and tax teams. They aren't crossing their fingers and relying on a vendor's black box canonical model to correctly interpret a highly complex intercompany transfer pricing adjustment.
That's an interesting point, though. I would definitely frame it differently. The canonical data model isn't magic. It's just modern data orchestration. By absorbing the raw standard transactional data directly from the ERP without requiring the customer to pre-transform it, the platform genuinely takes on the integration burden.
Assuming the platform actually understands the nuances of your business.
That the vendor's canonical model acts as a universal hub, it standardizes the data once. And from there, any required regulatory output, whether it's fattura PI in Italy or a safety file in Romania, can be generated through system configuration rather than custom development. If you don't do this, the IT organization becomes a permanent operational bottleneck in the compliance infrastructure. That is simply not sustainable given the volume and velocity of regulatory change we are seeing globally.
I certainly don't disagree that the sheer volume of change is staggering, but we have to evaluate these architectures based on the realities of enterprise risk appetite. If an IT director or a CFO chooses the pre-formatted route, They are making a conscious choice,
A choice forced by bad vendor options, usually.
or a choice based on known variables. They are choosing a known operational cost, the cost of paying their team to maintain transformation code, over an unknown architectural risk, the risk of handing over their raw, highly sensitive financial data to a third-party mapping engine that might systematically misinterpret it and trigger a massive audit. The failure modes we've discussed today are, in many ways, just pragmatic risk mitigation strategies. They prioritize local control, immediate legal compliance, and systemic stability over overarching global analytical intelligence.
But that's exactly the core thesis of why this needs to change. The definition of compliance has evolved, but those risk mitigation strategies really haven't. The market is designing for a problem that no longer exists in isolation.
The problem of legal compliance absolutely still exists.
Yes, but I will concede that these designs were not irrational given their historical context. 10 years ago, when the primary challenge was just reliable document exchange at the end of the month, the unintelligent messenger transmission model made perfect sense. But CTC frameworks require real-time intelligence, not just transport. Treating compliance as a localized, transmission-focused problem today ignores the reality of modern financial operations.
And how would you define that new reality, practically speaking?
That the data itself is the asset. Only a unified platform that takes raw ERP data into a universal, canonical model can turn compliance from a painful, periodic legal obligation into a strategic, real-time intelligence asset. Think about the power of that.
It sounds great in a boardroom.
It works in reality, too. If you can see your live VAT positions globally across all subsidiaries, you can dynamically optimize your cash flow. If you have standardized compliance data flowing continuously into a single lake, you can deploy AI for real-time anomaly detection and audit defense. You simply cannot do any of that if your data is locked in custom ERP tables or fragmented across a vendor's M&A patchwork or lost in translation scripts.
I agree that the external intelligence layer is a profoundly powerful concept. It is the future. Where I diverge is in the outright dismissal of the existing architectures as mere traps or failures. Evaluating these models purely as failure modes ignores their immense utility in solving immediate, deeply complex, jurisdiction-specific transmission and calculation problems without requiring a massive, multi-year IT overhaul.
But the overhaul is inevitable.
Eventually, maybe. But building a perfect clean core ERP relationship with a brilliant external, intelligence-generating compliance layer is a massive transformational project. It takes years. And frankly, many CFOs simply need to make sure they aren't hit with a massive fine in Poland next quarter. They need the pipes to work today, even if they aren't analyzing the chemical composition of the water just yet.
I think that is exactly where we find our strongest point of convergence today. Both of us agree that the sheer volume, velocity, and real-time nature of regulatory changes are pushing legacy IT architectures to their absolute breaking points. Whether you view these existing models as necessary pragmatic stepping stones or as dangerous architectural traps, the pressure on the system is undeniable.
Oh, absolutely. The era of the simple monthly reporting batch is completely over. We are firmly in the era of real-time, transaction-level scrutiny, and that requires a fundamentally different level of technological capability, regardless of how an organization chooses to architect it.
It demands that organizations look past a vendor's geographical coverage map. A marketing slide with 50 shaded countries tells you absolutely nothing about how the system mechanically operates under the hood. It's imperative to interrogate the underlying architectural philosophy of the tools you buy. There is so much more to explore in this space regarding how clean core ERP principles can integrate seamlessly with these external compliance layers without sacrificing latency or control.
And perhaps most importantly, it forces IT and tax departments to actually sit down and talk to each other about these architectural constraints, which is a rare and highly necessary conversation.
Exactly. Ultimately, the judgment on which architectural trade-offs to make belongs to the leaders managing their own unique organizational complexity. But they have to know that the fundamental nature of the pipes has changed. We aren't just moving water from point A to point B anymore. We're required to analyze every single drop in real time before it's legally allowed to flow.
It's a whole new world.
It leaves us with a lingering question for anyone managing these systems. Are you just building custom code to survive today's local regulatory mandate, or are you architecting the foundation for tomorrow's global financial intelligence? Thank you for joining us on this exploration. We'll leave you to think on that.